You know, for any serious tennis player, the shoulder is this double-edged sword. It's where all that incredible power comes from, right? The engine behind a 120 miles per hour serve, but it's also a constant source of worry. It's the joint that takes the biggest beating from the punishing, repetitive nature of the sport, and this creates a really fascinating paradox. Are the changes we see in a tennis player's shoulder a sign of elite adaptation, or is it just a ticking time bomb for injury?
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll dig into that core paradox. Then, we'll look inside the actual physical profile of these players to reveal some of the hidden imbalances a recent study uncovered. From there, we'll get into the big debate. Is this a high-performance adaptation or a serious injury risk? And finally, we'll put it all together into a new training playbook based on what we've learned.
All right, first up, let's get right to the heart of why the shoulder is such a massive focus in the tennis world. And this isn't just a feeling players have. The data tells a really, really clear story. I mean, just look at this number, 50%. According to research, nearly half of older, high-level tennis players report having shoulder pain. That is an unbelievably high number, and it points to this fundamental conflict between what the sport demands of you and your body's long-term health.
Think about it. Every serve, every forehand, every overhead smash, it's an explosive, one-sided motion over and over again. After thousands of hours of practice and matches, that dominant shoulder just gets put through so much more than the non-dominant one, and that, inevitably, leads to some pretty unique changes in how it functions and is structured.
And that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? Are these changes a good thing, like a necessary evolution to perform at the highest level, or are they a physical weakness that's just paving the way for a chronic injury? Well, this is exactly what a group of sports scientists wanted to figure out in a recent study. So how did the researchers even go about this? Well, to get real answers, they knew they had to build a complete, in-depth physical profile of tennis players at different levels of the game. They got together 24 competitive players, both men and women. Then they split them into 3 groups. An elite male group, we're talking guys ranked professionally on the ATP Tour, and then 2 national-level groups, 1 male and 1 female. That way they could see how things differ based on skill level and gender. Their testing process had 3 main parts. First, they measured the shoulder's flexibility, its range of motion. Then, they tested the static strength of those super important rotator cuff muscles. And finally, they looked at dynamic balance in the lower body, the foundation for the entire movement. Now, this is really cool. Look at how they measured strength. Instead of testing it during a movement, they used this electromechanical dynamometer to measure what's called isometric force. The athlete basically pulls as hard as they can against a cable that won't move, which gives a super pure, super precise reading of just how strong those rotator muscles are. So, after all this detailed testing, what did they actually find? Well, the data started showing some really fascinating and consistent patterns of imbalance in these athletes. The first huge finding was an external rotation. That's the layback motion of your arm right before you hit the ball. Take a look at the elite male group. Their dominant serving shoulder had way more external rotation, almost 9 degrees more than their non-dominant shoulder. You just didn't see that big of a difference in the other groups. And this just perfectly illustrates that specific adaptation we're talking about. The dominant shoulder of an elite player is physically different. It's actually developed a greater range of motion for one specific reason: to generate more power and more racket speed. This creates a really clear asymmetry when you compare it to the other side of their body. But here's the thing. In tennis, the power doesn't start at the shoulder. It starts from the ground up. So the researchers asked a really important question. If the upper body is this imbalanced, what in the world is going on with the foundation? And this is where it gets really, really interesting. They use something called the Y-balance test. It measures how well you can balance on one leg while reaching out with the other. And what they found was a huge red flag. Across the board, elite, national, male, female, it didn't matter. The players had poor dynamic stability. Their scores were below the cutoff that's often linked to a higher risk of lower body injuries. And not only that, they also had a significant imbalance between their legs, too. Turns out the foundation was shaky for everybody. So you've got these 2 key findings: a very specific shoulder asymmetry in the top players and a general lower body instability in pretty much all of them. This brings us right back to that central debate in sports science for anyone who plays an overhead sport. One way of looking at it, which the researchers bring up, is that this isn't a flaw at all. These shoulder imbalances are functional. They are specific adaptations the body makes to handle the unique one-sided demands of a sport like tennis. You could almost say it's evolution in action. So here's the whole debate in a nutshell. Is that extra shoulder rotation a finely tuned weapon? Something you absolutely need for elite power? Or is it a structural weakness that's slowly but surely grinding the joint down? Are we looking at a brilliant adaptation? Or is that difference in range of motion, like some researchers suggest, a ticking time bomb just waiting for a breakdown?
Okay, so with all this data and this debate in mind, what's the practical application? What does this actually mean for players and coaches who are trying to get the most out of their performance while staying off the sidelines?
Right. So the big takeaway here is not to try and fix that shoulder asymmetry. For elite players, that extra range of motion is a weapon. The real goal is to build a stronger, more stable body around that weapon. You need a balanced foundation that can safely support these extreme, high-performance adaptations.
So what does that actually look like in the gym? Well, the action plan comes straight from the findings. To support that elite shoulder, you need mobility work through the entire chain, your spine, your hips, everything. To handle those incredible forces, you have to balance the rotator cuff and, this is huge, strengthen the muscles that act as the brakes, the ones that slow your arm down after you hit. And maybe most importantly, to fix that shaky foundation they found, you have got to focus on core and lower body strength. It's all about building a resilient base.
And all of this leaves us with a critical question for every single coach and player out there. Is your training building a balanced, resilient athlete? Or, in that relentless chase for more power and more velocity, are you accidentally building a beautiful weapon on a foundation of sand, just waiting for the whole thing to come crashing down?